With the release of Dragon Ball Daima, we got to experience in episode 1 a ton of flashbacks to the main events of Dragon Ball Z. This got a ton of fans crazy for a potential remake of the show. But if Z is actually getting a remake, will it still carry the same intensity, violence, and brutality that made Z so famous? Dragon Ball has always been famous for its depiction of violence. Blood, bruises, cries of pain, along with moments of desperation as characters grapple with the overwhelming gap between their strength and that of their enemy. It's a very raw and animalistic way of presenting violence. It has always been an anime about pushing yourself to the limit, and how it is through hardship and training that we can improve ourselves. But even then, Goku is a character that fights as a means of defense, or just for the pure joy of fighting, but never really as a means of aggression. He avoids killing as much as he can, and at the same time, he shows tremendous respect to both his allies but also his enemies. And if a remake of Z is actually on the cards, I doubt that this type of violence is going to be shown in the same light. Just by looking at Dragon Ball Super or even the most recent Broly movie, you can tell exactly what kind of direction we are going for. Everything is just a lot more clean and soft. There's no blood or dismemberment. But it's not really only about that. There are certain scenes in Z that really push you to make you feel like you should not really mess with these villains, or just to showcase how evil they can actually be. A great example on this is Frieza. Frieza and his men go to all the villages in Namek in order to find the Dragon Balls. Each village has one of the Dragon Balls, and when they get to this particular one, they essentially torture the entirety of the village, killing every single one of the members, and even going to a point where they kill a child. And it's the way that everything is presented, the weight of, I believe it's Dodoria killing this child. Honestly, it was kind of a shock to me, even when rewatching this. Scenes like this actually help you a lot to understand that these guys are ruthless. You do not want to mess with them. A very interesting example also is Trunks' past. Trunks is a character that goes 20 years in the future in order to stop what happens in his timeline. Android 17 and 18 basically wipe out most of humanity, including our familiar allies. But one of the most powerful scenes is adult Gohan actually dying in Trunks' arms. And in a shout of pain and desperation, Trunks manages to achieve Super Saiyan status. To be fair with Super though, there are some scenes, especially in the movies, that can get quite brutal. There's this one scene specifically between Goku and Broly when they're fighting that it gets quite rough. Even Goku, when he's shouting, it's like almost like in a desperate way. But at the end of the day, let Dragon Ball Super be its own thing. Actually, the latest chapters, at least in the manga, have been quite heavy when it comes to violence, especially the Moro arc. Look at these panels, holy! And I do wonder actually if this wasn't planned out by Toriyama and Toyotaro, since the OG Dragon Ball wasn't really that violent, only in the end with the battle between Piccolo and Goku. So I'm wondering if they're taking into account that a new generation of kids potentially now watch Dragon Ball Super, and maybe now it's time to add a little bit more violence to the manga and potentially the anime, since now these kids are now older teenagers or even young adults. But that's just pure speculation, really. But it's undeniable that the tone of Super has shifted quite dramatically to a much more lighthearted and friendly approach. And I think the objective is just to get to a wider audience when it comes to marketing. I did find one thing very curious, is that Dragon Ball Z, when it first aired in the 90s, it actually aired on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. while Dragon Ball Super actually aired at Sundays at 9 a.m. The audiences that you're going to get on a Sunday at 9 a.m. are definitely not going to be the same as an audience on a Tuesday 7 p.m. That has a ton of weight on the type of content you're going to make. But I do think there's a bigger reason for this. Animes in the 80s and 90s were just a lot more visceral and brutal in their depiction of violence. This was probably due to a lack of restrictions and much looser censorship, specifically in Japan, and a much higher focus on seinen manga that aims to appeal to an adult audience. But there were a lot of animes at this time, and even in the early 2000s, that the way that they depict violence is actually so gruesome and brutal that you're left to wonder what exactly is the role of violence in these contexts. Is it just to impress the viewer? Is it for marketing purposes? Is it really important to showcase that in the story? Does it actually help to develop the story of a character? I think there's absolutely an argument to be made that a lot of these creators pursue extreme violence just for sake of shock value and not really to elevate their storytelling. Violence Jack is probably one of the most infamous cases of this. At the time of its release with the manga, it was actually considered one of the most shocking and controversial works of manga ever to be made, with the anime following suit. It depicts some of the weirdest and brutalest things you could ever see in any of anime history, and it's one of those animes that really makes you question the role of violence in storytelling. I guess bad publicity is good publicity? But since then, the anime market has become a lot more consolidated, with a lot more restrictions, rules, and marketing checkboxes that need to be checked in order to appeal to a bigger audience. It's important to say that there are still plenty of animes that are very violent. Jujutsu Kaisen, Attack on Titan, Devilman Crybaby are just some of the few animes that do have a lot of violence and gore to them. I just don't believe that they are as predominant as they were in the 80s and the 90s. It's just that it's a lot harder to sell those types of products on how the market is positioned right now. I do believe that all of this pushed Dragon Ball to be a lot more tamed in the way violence is depicted in its anime form. I do think that this is kind of becoming an issue. I think the market is becoming too restrictive, and this hinders quite heavily the creativity of artists. Violence is inherent to being human. It's a part of our history and our collective culture. Violence is just another way to help you develop your own characters. When it comes to the animation world, I think Studio Ghibli is actually one of the best examples on this. Even though Hayao Miyazaki has stated before how he hates violence, I think he understands the role of violence in storytelling very well. He clearly reflects violence in his stories, and he does a really good job in depicting it in a way that feels real, brutal, but at the same time grounded in reality. Even if you go to actual movies like Akira Kurosawa's Ran, he showcases violence in a very brutal way also. But I think all of the violence that he shows helps to elevate Lord Ishimonji's overall story. He's a lord that established his own kingdom in this region, but now that he's old and death seems to come nearer and nearer to him, he is just left to watch all of his kingdom fall apart and die. And showcasing that violence is almost a necessity to help you understand what he is feeling. The movie The Revenant, that is very much a movie about the resilience of humanity to survive at any cost, without this emphasis on brutality and violence, just would not work. The bear scene pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the movie. But why am I giving you all of these different examples that are not related to Dragon Ball Z? Well, I think Dragon Ball Z fits in the same sort of category to all of these movies and mangas. Dragon Ball Z's push for violence is a necessity that helps the character's story and growth through hardship, struggle, blood, sweat, and tears. Always with the objective to overcome new obstacles. And can they showcase it without it? Of course they can. They've done it with Super. And even Dragon Ball Kai has actually suffered a ton of censorship when it was released. The only thing that I'm arguing here is that the message, the impact of what you want to showcase is simply not going to be delivered in the same sort of emotion and power without that brutality and that violence being showcased to us. But at the end of the day, we don't even know if we're going to get a Dragon Ball Z remake. But if we do, I hope it's a faithful recreation. But due to all of the marketing restrictions that are on right now, I highly doubt it will be that way.